Folks, welcome back to the Bobby Bo Show. Here's the moves it starts with, and I got a special surprise for you today. Because we got 2,000 likes in the last video, you guys unlocked a random fact about me. So congratulations. And for the next random fact, we need 3,000 likes. And today I'll tell you that after high school, I attended the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And for the first couple years, I studied art and design, but then I felt like I would rather be doing computer science and maybe I'd just draw for fun on my own time. But then after a couple more years of that, I decided, hey, maybe I'd rather play video games all the time. So I started a YouTube channel, and then I dropped out of college and started playing Fortnite. So that's a bit of lore on the Bobby Bo Show. And I also want to know a little bit about you guys. So let me know in the comments what you're studying or what you want to study, or if you don't want to go to college and you have a different plan, what's that plan? I hope you enjoyed today's episode. And it's actually one of the greatest games of all time, but it starts with the Caro-Kann as usual. And this time they defend the middle pawn with c3, and I take it, and they take back, and now they have two pawns in the middle. And the whole point is to target this pawn, try to win this pawn. So knight to c6, and after knight to f3, now I play bishop to b5, pinning the knight to the queen. And that also stops the knight from defending this pawn. But after bishop to b5, now my knight is pinned to my king. And first I should play e6, but I go queen to b6, and that's fine too, threatening the bishop here, and they can defend it with knight to c3. But now I can take their knight, and they don't want to double their pawns up, so they take back with the queen. But now this pawn's not defended. So I can just take it, right? No, I can't take it. Why? Because now this pawn's under attack twice. And I missed that. And I've actually probably made this mistake a couple times before, but I need to play e6 first before I do this maneuver. But they have to make the right move still. What would you do? Queen or knight? And they're going to play queen here. They're going to take with the queen, and that's the wrong move. But let's look at the knight move. They take. And now, okay, I'm about to get forked here. What should I do? Well, if I castle, okay, now I'm attacking the knight twice, right? And I'm about to take this pawn with check. But after bishop captures c6, I take back with the pawn. Knight has to move. Knight goes back to c3. And now if I try to take this pawn with check, they just go bishop to e3, almost done with development. And if this bishop wasn't pinned, they'd take on a7 next, or the queen can take on c6, checking my king. So I have to move my king here to b7 to defend both the pawns, and now they can just take on f7. Back to even material, but look at the position. My king is all the way over here, next to two pawns that are solo pawns, not connected to any other pawns. Unsafe, I have no development. This pawn's by itself, they're almost fully developed, they just have to castle next, get the rooks out. So because of my king safety and my terrible pawns and their better development, I'm probably going to lose this game. If it goes like that. If they take with the knight here. But instead of taking with the knight, they take with the queen. And now we have to trade queens. And now they're threatening the fork here. And I should just play rook to c8. Because if they take my knight, then I'll have to take back with the pawn. And I'll have these solo pawns that are going to be very weak, like I said earlier. Just going to be a bad position. So I should play rook to c8. But I castle now, attacking the knight. And after bishop captures c6, I take back with the pawn. And now I have this pawn problem. But now the knight's under attack, so it goes back to b4. And I push the pawn to attack the knight. And I figure I'll just control this open file with my rook and maybe finish development here. And I'm not really worried about king safety because the queens are gone, so I figure it's not that much of a problem. But it is a bit of a problem. If they play knight to a6, attacking my pawn, and just having a very active knight here. But instead they go back. And now what I want to do is finish development, get these pieces out, and double up these rooks on the file here. So I play rook to d5. Attacking the pawn, they have to respond to that, right? So bishop to f4, defending the pawn, and also finishing development. And here, probably e6, but I'm thinking I have to get the knight and the bishop out. I want to get the knight out first. But if I play e6 and then knight to e7, I'll be blocking the bishop, when I could just go knight to h6, and then I go knight to f5. But I really should be more worried about them taking on h6 here, doubling up my pawns. But I don't know, people are very apprehensive to trade bishop for knight. But if they just take here, now my pawns are doubled up. These are my only connected pawns. And they have 4 connected pawns on the king side here. They have 2 connected pawns on the outside here versus my 2 solo pawns. Which is a slight advantage for white here if they take. But instead, they castle. And now I should play knight to f5 so they can't take my knight. But here I play e6. And I'm about to get my bishop out. This also defends the pawn now. And after rook a to d1, there's a bit of tension. I have to decide what to do here. Should I start trading pieces? Should I develop the bishop here? Or knight to f5? And if I take the rook, they'll have the open file with the rook, which just helps them. And I'm trying to double up my rooks on the file here. That's what I'm trying to go for. So I could play bishop to e7 and then get my rook out, but I don't want them to take my knight and double my pawns up if they decide that's the best move. So I go knight to f5, and that's the best move. And I'm not worried about them trading rooks here, because if they take my rook, like they do, now I take back with the e-pawn, and I have 2 pawns. This one has no pawn stopping it, so I can just push these pawns down the board, probably going to get a queen here. And the engine says still a draw. But honestly, the engine's going to be a little bit wrong sometimes here, and if it tries to think for a little bit longer, sometimes it changes its mind about who's winning. But definitely this is an easier endgame for me, I think, even if it's a draw still by perfect play. just because I have these 2 pawns connected in the middle, about to go down the board. I'm going to finish development, get my rook behind it. And after rook to d1, threatening my pawn now, I have to decide, do I push it or do I do something else? And I don't want to lose this pawn, and pushing it's the best move here. But in the moment, I'm thinking about how pushing this pawn is committing, when maybe I want to play c4, and if I just go knight to e7, then I can decide which pawn I want to push later. But here I should just play d4, but I play knight to e7, and this might be just as good. I'm blocking my bishop now, but I am defending the d5 pawn, and these pawns are controlling 4 squares in the middle, so just some very strong pawns here, and if I push them, then it might weaken them a little bit. That's what I was thinking. Now I can also go knight to g6, but it's their turn. They go knight to e3, attacking my pawn twice now, and I can't add another defender, so I have to push it forward. Now they have to move their knight, so knight to c4, and it looks like their knight's making some progress forward, about to come to d6, but I'm not worried about it. I go knight to g6, threatening their bishop, and also adding an attacker to the pawn here. They want to keep their bishop, so they move it back to g3. Good move. But now I continue my development with bishop to e7. Almost done. But now they play knight to d6 check, and I have to decide what to do here. Do I move the king out of check, or do I take it with the bishop? And I'm going to play king to d7, but before we look at that, let's look at bishop takes. They take back with the pawn, and now you play king to d7, bishop defending the pawn here, and they play b4, threatening your pawn. And if you push it, then they take with the rook. So you take the pawn, and now the rook takes your d4 pawn. But now you have a5, and you have these 2 connected outside pawns. And here's one of those moments where the engine was saying it was drawn, but by playing the best moves according to the engine, now it's saying that black is winning. And it's because your king is in front of their passed pawn, so they can't really make progress here. And your pieces are nearby if you need it. And also, your 2 connected passed pawns on the outside are going to go up against their 1 pawn. And when you trade pawns, you're going to have 1 solo passed pawn on the outside going down the board with maybe a rook behind it, maybe a knight coming over to support it, and you're going to promote to a queen. And their king has to get over here to stop it, but it's all the way over here, and your king is already stopping their passed pawn. So that's why you're winning this endgame. Let's say rook to d5, attacking your pawn. Now rook to a8, defending the pawn. And now they have to start bringing the king over, but they just don't get there in time. But I didn't take the knight. I don't know what I was thinking here. I probably thought the knight can't go anywhere, but actually the f7 pawn's not defended. And they can just play knight captures f7. But it might not change anything actually, because even though this pawn is missing, it's pretty much the same scenario. The knight can't go back over here, so it has to come back to here. It's almost trapped. And after rook to f8, attacking the knight, I think they might have one move here that draws the game. And what's that move? Rook to e1, defending the pawn. Because if you take the knight, they push the pawn, forking your rook and your king. You can't take the knight. You have to go king to e6, but now knight to d6. And if you take, then they take back with their pawn and you're in check. And now this is probably losing, apparently. If they play rook to e1, but instead they play knight to d6. And I'm winning again if I take the knight here. And I do. And after they take back with the pawn, now I have to decide what to do. And what do you do here? Well, I'm thinking about what are they going to do. And they have to stop these pawns. So I'm thinking they're going to play something like b4 here. And I'm trying to decide if I'm worried about b4. But I figure I can just bring the king over here. And if they take my pawn, I'll take back with my king. And then my king will be defending my pawn. And I'll just walk the pawn down the board with my king. And okay, my king is blocking this pawn from promoting, but I figure if my king moves forward, I can use this rook to stop it from promoting. But I can't. I have to play knight to f4. Only move here. Knight to f4 actually stops b4. And can you see why? It doesn't really look like it, but it does. If you go knight to f4, and they play b4, well, before you couldn't play c4, right? Because they take with the rook. And that might look like a problem still, but if you play c4, they can't take with the rook because then you have a fork. And if they try to take your knight first, then you take back with the rook, and you have these 2 pawns in the middle. Now they're even more passed, and they have no chance of stopping them. This pawn is about to get taken. So knight to f4 blocks b4, right? And now if they try to trade bishop for knight, and now once again they want to play b4, but your rook is defending a d4 pawn that they want to take, so they have to play g3, but you just move your rook back to f7. And after they play b4 now, king captures d6. And after they take your pawn, you take back with the king, defending the pawn now, and you're about to walk it down. And they have to bring the king over, but king to f1, and then you play rook to e7. And your rook controls the open file, stops the king from coming over. So you're just going to walk it down now. And if they go rook to e1, you can just trade off, and now it's a winning king and pawn endgame. You're going to try to walk the pawn down, and their king's going to block it, but then you're just going to come over here and take the a pawn, and now they can't stop the promotion. And these pawns can't get down fast enough. They have to move all their pawns in order to get through your 2 pawns. And you're just going to walk it down. So I have to play knight to f4 first. But instead I play king to c6. And now I can't stop the pawn from going down the board. I thought I could though. Now they play b4. And I'm just going to take back with my king. And if they push, I'm going to stop it with my rook. So I go knight to f4. And I'm fine, right? No! Now the rook can't go back after they take my knight. Because after b captures c5, now they have two connected passed pawns. And I'm the one in trouble. So my king takes on c5. And my rook can't get back. Because they just push it. And when I go to f8, they have rook to c1 check. And this is what I didn't see. And now after my king goes to d6, they bring the rook to c8. And they can promote. And I either have to take the rook and let them get a queen, or take the pawn and let them take my rook. And I can't promote this. They're just going to get back. The king can stop it. But they didn't play bishop captures f4. Instead, they were thinking about what I was trying to do, and that's knight to e2 check, hitting the king and the bishop, and then I can trade off bishop for knight. And then I have a very easy time pushing these pawns down, and they wanted to stop knight to e2. And also activate their king into the endgame by bringing it over here to stop the pawns, so they played king to f1. And it looks like a completely logical move, and it's actually not a bad move, but I have one move that wins the game. And what is that? And look at this pawn, not defended by the bishop anymore because the knight is blocking the bishop. I can just take it. And that's the second best move, and that's what I did. But I need to play knight to d5. And look at this, I'm hitting the pawn, and I'm also about to fork the rook and the king. The pawn is pinned to the king because of my rook. I didn't see this though. No, instead I took the pawn. And I figured I'm okay, because after b captures c5, I take back with the king, and then I'm just walking it down like before, right? But now the king can get over here. And now they want to be able to bring their bishop back, so they play f3. The bishop can move. And now I go king to c4. And I'm just trying to walk the pawn down. Now bishop to f2. And they're attacking my pawn twice with the rook and the bishop. I have to deal with that. And what would you do now? And pushing is not an option. It's a draw if you push. Why? Because if you push, then they have rook to c1 check. And now where can you go? Pawn blocks this square, and you have to step off the file, and the bishop blocks this diagonal, so you have to step back to d5. And now the king is blocked off from the pawn, and this looks like it's going to be a draw. You can't push the pawn yet, and I saw that. The best move is knight to d3. But instead of knight to d3, which would attack the bishop and block the rook from attacking my pawn, I played rook to d8, and I figured it's best to get my rook behind the pawn, and it makes it easier to push. I think this is still winning, but it's saying inaccuracy, but sometimes the engine has trouble with endgames, and I don't have the depth all the way up. And now I think it's best to play rook to c1 check, but they play bishop to g3, and it's saying big mistake now. Knight to d5, crushing apparently, because if I put my knight on e3, well that would be forking the king and the rook, but after they move their rook, I can just put my knight on e3, and it's a very powerful knight defended by the pawn here. Or if they try to check their king with my rook, then I can block with my knight. Also defending the square here, and making it very easy to promote. I should have played knight to d5 after bishop to g3. But g5, probably also a good move. Defending the knight, advancing my pawns, and if they take, then I have a pawn blocking their pawns. So now they play h4, but I just play h6, and if they take, I take back, and I just have a good knight that's defended by a pawn, also blocking their bishop off. So they play h captures g5, and I take back, and they finally decide to trade this bishop for this knight when it probably would have been better earlier. But now, look at the situation. Even material, but look at the pawns. A solo passed pawn defended by my rook and my king, only their rook stopping it right now. These two pawns are equal, but my king is closer. And they have a 2 versus 1 situation right here. But my solo pawn stops both of their pawns in this formation. They can't push it, because then I'll just go down and promote, right? And if they try to go 2 squares, I could even en passant. So it is important to know that you can actually block 2 pawns with 1 pawn, if you have it in this formation. And now their king has to come over to stop the promotion, so they play king to e2, but it's a big mistake. I can just play d3 check, but I was thinking I have to play king to c3, because I figured I'll stop their king from getting in front of the pawn, right? Because my king will be blocking these squares. And if they try to check me, I'll just walk the king over here and take this pawn, right? But d3 is the best move, because after their king goes in front of the pawn, I just play rook to g8, attacking their pawn here. So they have to play rook to c1 to defend it, right? But now they have no good moves. Their king has to stop my pawn from moving forward. Their rook has to stop me from taking this pawn. And if they push this pawn, then my rook can just come over and take it. And no matter what they do, they're going to lose something. So I have to push the pawn here. But instead, I push the king to c3, stopping their king from coming forward. But now rook to d3 check. And I should just go back, but I'm going after this pawn. King to b2. defending the pawn. But now they can just play rook to d2 check, defending the pawn here, and I just have to go back and try something else. Or if I go b1 because I'm still trying to take the pawn, then they just push it, and my king is stuck on the back rank. I just have to go back here. But instead of rook to d2, they just push the pawn. And now it's -7. I'm completely winning now. Completely easy finish. All I have to do now is play king to c2, and it's too late for rook to d2 check. There's now king to c3, rook to d3 check, king to c4, and I just have to go after these pawns. No good moves for them. They can't push these pawns. If they push this pawn, I'm just going to take it. If their king goes to d2, then I just have rook to g8, unstoppable. So the rook goes back. But now d3 check. King gets in front of the pawn, and now what do? Well, if you're thinking what I'm thinking, your rook's defending this pawn, so you can just bring the king over here and take on a3. But you can't. You need to play rook to g8 once again and go after this pawn, and when they try to defend it with the rook, they just have no good moves. But if you play king to b3, now they have rook to b1 check. And after rook to b1 check, their rook is activated. You can't take this pawn because they're going to play rook to a1 and then take your pawn. And now you have no advantage, because what you need to be doing is using the fact that their king has to stop this pawn, take this pawn, and then promote your a pawn or this pawn. But if you trade pawns on the outside here, then you're not going to be able to make progress. So I need to win the pawn, not trade. But instead of rook to b1 check, they play a4. And they're just trying to get me to take this so they can check me and take my pawn and draw like I just said. But instead of taking the pawn, I play a5. But now they play rook to e1. And look at what's happening. If I take this pawn, rook to e4 check. And then they're going to take my pawn. And then they have two outside pass pawns. And now this pawn's not blocking the two pawns like it was earlier. That was a huge part of my position. And I didn't see this coming. So I have to make the right moves. And I should just play rook to d4, stopping this. But king captures a4. And I figure I'm not worried about it because I thought about it for a little bit. And after rook to d4 check, I play king to b3. And after they take my pawn, I'm thinking, okay, I'm just walking it down. They can't stop it, right? How does the rook get back? But there's one way to stop it. And after a4, what would you play as white? In order to stop this pawn, white has to bring the rook to f6 or f7. If you go to h4, you do not have time to stop it. But if you play rook to f7, now they can check me, and I'll either have to step in front of the pawn or go to c4. And then they'll put their rook behind my pawn. And after rook to a8, trying to push my pawn down, now they have rook to b7 check, king to c4, rook to c7 check. And if I go back, I either get checked on the b file or step in front of my pawn, right? And this rook is just going to check me unless I move towards it. So king to d5. And after they take my pawn, now I try to push it. But rook to c1. And now the rook is back in time. a2. And now the rook is in front of it. They have two outside pass pawns here. And it's going to be a draw. Their king is going to come over here. They're going to trade. And I'm going to take their pawns with my king. So this would be a draw. If they play rook to f7 or rook to f6. That is kind of hard to see. Instead, they play rook to e4, and they're trying to bring their rook back, but it doesn't get there in time. a3. Now my king's here. And now they see that. So here they try to go rook to e6, but it's not good anymore. And now I should just play rook to a8, and I can even push the pawn. But I play rook to d4. But apparently rook to d4 is a mistake here, because they should be playing rook to e1, and it's actually good if the rook goes back now, but they play g4, saying missed win, and the engine could be misevaluating the endgame here. But after a2, rook to e1 now, it looks like the rook is too late, and it looks like you're about to move the king up and promote, and they have to take your queen with the rook, and then you just have a rook versus two pawns, and you're winning, right? But king to b2 is a mistake. It's another draw. They can't stop the promotion here, but you have to back it up with the rook instead of the king. Because your king has to be back here to stop these pawns. Watch what happens. They play g5. Now I promote. They're forced to take with the rook. I take back with the king. But now my king is on a1. They're about to promote these pawns. And okay, my rook can get one of these pawns. But by the time my rook gets one of these pawns, their king is going to take my pawn. And then it's going to defend the other pawn. And even though I'm up a rook +4 material, it's a draw. g6. And I have to stop the promotion. So I play rook to d6, attacking the pawn. and still defending this pawn. So they're forced to push it forward to g7. And now I can just get behind it, and I'm about to take it. So I won one pawn with the rook, right? But now they take my pawn. And after I take their pawn, they can just push this pawn down, and the king is there to support it. f4. My king is in the corner here. I have to bring it over. King to b2. But now king to e4, and the king and the pawn are connected. King to c3, trying to get there. But now f5, and they're 3 pushes away from promoting, and I have to bring my king closer. So king to c4. But the problem is, their king is blocking these 3 squares, called opposition. An important chess concept, you have to know what opposition is, and they don't. Because after king to e5, king to c5, I still can't come over, and they should just push the pawn, but instead, they play a losing move, which is king to f6, attacking my rook. Oh no, but now my king can come over, and I can just move my rook over, rook to c7, and after the king gets out of the way, king to e6. It's mate in 59 according to the engine. Look at this, mate in 59. But I do it in less. I play rook to c6 check, and after they go king to e7, now I can go king to d5, and the king is getting in there, but it can't get in there yet. Now they can play f6, and it looks like they're about to promote. Oh no! But what's the move? Mate in 9, after rook to c7 check, and now my king is blocking their king from moving. This pawn is blocking the king. King can't go over here because of the rook, so it has to step over here. And after king to e8, still trying to get that promotion, but it's almost checkmate after king to e6, and they resign. If it was my turn right now, I'd play king to c8 checkmate, but it's their turn. If they push the pawn, I just checkmate, so they have to move the king. If the king attacks my rook, I just bring it over here and take the pawn, and then checkmate, king and rook checkmate. Pretty easy one. I have a video on that if you need to see it. Probably the most intense endgame I've ever played. It went back and forth so many times, and I did come out on top, but it was kind of an accident. But a great game, and if you want to see more games like it, make sure you're subscribed to the Bobby Bo Show. Smash like for more random facts, and I hope you have an excellent rest of your day. Goodbye.